Hi guys, Christmas is coming, and this gives me the perfect excuse to talk about something many of us probably like a lot, chocolate. Today I'm going to tell you the history of chocolate. Before I forget, there was one thing I wanted to tell you or warn you about. If you have a dog or a cat, it is very important to never give chocolate to these animals. This is poison for them because there is an alkaloid called theobromine in cocoa beans that poisons dogs and cats because they cannot eliminate it quickly, and you don't need a very big quantity of dark chocolate being much worse than milk chocolate to poison them. So please don't do it, and warn people around you. Okay, so now I would like you to relax, maybe close your eyes, and we are going to discover how cocoa beans that grew in Central America were discovered, transformed into chocolate as we know it today. How names like Cadbury, Hershey, Nestle appeared in the 19th century, and talk a little bit about the geography of cocoa and chocolate today. As I said, cocoa is coming from Central America, and more precisely from a region of Central America that archaeologists call Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica corresponds to the southern half of what is Mexico today, and includes several small countries like Belize, Nicaragua, and Mesoamerica is identified as a region because this is where several civilizations flourished, sharing common cultural traits, including the Olmecs, the Mayans, and probably the most famous one because it was at the top of its power when the Spanish conquistadors arrived, the Aztecs. The first proofs of cocoa consumption that we have today are coming from these early Mesoamerican civilizations, with traces dating back from minus 1500 to minus 1000 before Christ. This is almost 2 millenniums and a half before they were discovered by the Europeans, and for all of that period the production of cocoa remained limited to the Mesoamerican region. Even though trade was existing between these civilizations and other people, for example in the centuries before Christ and after the beginning of our era, we have proofs that imported cocoa beans were consumed in the north of what is Mexico today and the southwest of the United States, among what is called the Pueblo people in New Mexico, for example. Cocoa in Mesoamerica was exclusively consumed under the form of a beverage. The cocoa beans were fermented, dried, and ground in a process that reminds of the process used to prepare coffee beans. If you watched the video I made about the history of coffee, and then exclusively consumed as a beverage, but not a sweet beverage as we would know it today. It was flavored sometimes with chili, for example, but the bitterness of cocoa and the absence of sweetening made it something very different from the chocolate we know today. And in the Mesoamerican civilization, the consumption of chocolate had a particular religious meaning. It was often associated with religious ceremonies and an important economic role as well. It seems that cocoa beans were used as a currency, and we have, for example, documents saying that the price of various things could be expressed in cocoa beans. For example, in the Mayan civilization, the price of a turkey could be close to 100 cocoa beans, whereas a fresh avocado had a price of 3 cocoa beans. Cocoa was also used in cooking as a sort of spice, and through the Mexican cuisine this has come to us. For example, the spicy sauce called mole in Mexican cuisine is something that can be traced back several centuries. It was already consumed and known by the Aztecs. What would reveal cocoa to the rest of the world would be the Spanish conquest of Central America, starting in the first decades of the 16th century. So, as you see, for almost 3 millenniums, cocoa had remained known essentially in that region of the world, and the spreading of cocoa is something relatively recent, especially since it would take a long time for cocoa to really become popular in Europe. For more than 1 century, cocoa remained known essentially in Spain, outside the Americas. Actually, Christopher Columbus had received a few beans as a gift in 1494, 2 years after he discovered America, by Indians, and he saw it as totally worthless, so that the beans were thrown away and not even consumed. It's only almost 10 years later, in 1502, on an island called Guanaja, that he discovered this cocoa drink and started to find it interesting. If you are familiar with the sorts of chocolate today, this name, Guanaja, may be familiar. This is one of the most famous sorts of cocoa cultivated today. Serious things would only begin in the years 1520, 1530, after the conquest of Mexico by the Spaniards, because they started to appreciate the drink when it was sweetened and perfumed with honey and vanilla, and then started to taste a bit more as we know chocolate today, even though it remained only a drink, and the production of a solid type of chocolate would wait a couple more centuries. During the 16th century, cocoa beans or chocolate were imported to Spain for the first time and became fairly popular at the Spanish court, and for several more decades the consumption of chocolate remained essentially Spanish. There was no big interest in discovering chocolate in the rest of Europe, and it only marginally spread to other countries, sometimes because the Spaniards owned other territories in Europe. For example, in the Low Countries or the Netherlands, the Spanish Netherlands that correspond to Belgium and a part of the Netherlands today, discovered chocolate this way, and it was also brought, but marginally, by minorities. For example, the Jews that had been converted and when they did not want to convert to Catholicism, expelled from Spain, which caused a number of losses to Spain in terms of industrial and commercial know-how. But the Jewish communities that went to North Africa or to France brought the knowledge, or marginally the consumption of chocolate with them. However, like for tea, the popularization of chocolate in the rest of Europe would essentially come from royal weddings. And if you remember in the video about the history of tea, I told you how tea had become popular in Britain following the wedding of the King of Britain, of the King of England, with a Portuguese princess. When it comes to chocolate, it would be through the wedding of Anne of Austria, contrary to what her name suggests, she was a Spanish princess to the future Louis XIII in France, the King of France, and from there the popularity of chocolate in the high society in Europe starts to spread quickly. It also came from the fact that other powers than Spain were now colonizing territories in America. England, for example, with the colony of Jamaica, where cocoa beans were produced and sent to London in the 17th century, and for France, islands like Martinique or Guadeloupe that were important centers of the production of colonial products. The first chocolate factory that was processing the cocoa beans in order to make the drink was opened in London in 1657 in the UK. More or less at the same time, factories appeared in other parts of Europe, in France, in Germany, in Italy too, and cocoa became one of these colonial products with sugar, with tobacco or coffee that the triangular trade in the Atlantic was bringing to Europe. Like for coffee, it was one of the products that justified or explained the development of slavery and the deportation of important populations from the western coasts of Africa to the New World. In the 18th century, the processing of cocoa beans and the fabrication of chocolate continue to spread in Europe, even though the product remains essentially consumed as a drink. The first mills that allow to extract the cocoa oil and fabricate hard chocolate appear, but it would take several decades more before what can be called really an industry emerges. There are essentially artisanal businesses processing these cocoa beans and transforming them into a beverage by sweetening them. Sugar that comes from the colonies of the West Indies is used also for that purpose, and vanilla is increasingly used also to flavor chocolate. All of the chocolate consumed until the 19th century is close to what we call dark chocolate today. It is only in the 19th century that milk chocolate, and at a later stage white chocolate, that essentially uses cocoa oil and does not have a very strong chocolate taste, that these other types of chocolate would appear. And what would really make chocolate change dimension would be the industrial revolution, starting in the last decades of the 18th century. And here we have several industrial plants processing chocolate that appear in North America. For example, the first factory to be opened in the US is founded in 1780. So we are really at an early stage in the history of the US. More or less at the same period, factories appear in England, where the Industrial Revolution has started to take off. And in the first decades of the 19th century, this spreads to the rest of Europe, including in countries that have no direct production of cocoa. This is the moment in the 19th century when the production of chocolate takes root in countries that have no colonial presence, like in Switzerland, for example, like in Italy, like also in Germany. And in each of these countries, large chocolate manufacturers appear and become known for now producing candies or tablets of chocolate that are hard and generally sweeter than the kind of chocolate that was consumed before. Names such as Hershey in the US, like Cadbury in the UK, like Nestlé in Switzerland, or Caffarel in Italy, that are still very famous worldwide and on their domestic market, appear in this period, making chocolate one of these products of the Industrial Revolution that changes the everyday life of a large part of the population. Contrary to other colonial products that remained limited to a small part of the population, chocolate has become relatively famous in various levels of the society, and is also at this time increasingly associated with the celebration of Christmas and Easter. And in the 20th century, the consumption of chocolate really became global, as this is now available in every country around the world. But still, the consumption per capita is very different from one country to another. The biggest consumers of chocolate are to be found in Northern Europe, in Switzerland first, which is the biggest chocolate consumer per capita in the world, with close to 10 kilos annually, or countries like Germany, the Scandinavian countries, and the UK. Comparatively, the consumption is limited in the south of Europe, in countries like Spain or Portugal. We are talking about less than 1 kilo annually per inhabitant. The US are in between, with 5.5 kilos annually. But in Asia, even though chocolate is something famous and easily available, the consumption remains limited, only slightly more than 100 grams, for example, in China per capita, which is 100 times less than in Switzerland. The production of cocoa, too, has dramatically changed geography in the 19th and 20th century as colonial powers were introducing cocoa in various colonies to generate more production and revenue. The historical center of cocoa production, which would correspond to the south of Mexico and Central America, continues to produce cocoa, as well as some other countries in the north of South America, like Colombia or Venezuela. Brazil also is a producer, but the biggest production now is to be found in Africa, and especially in Ivory Coast, a country which accounts for almost half the global production of cocoa after it had been introduced in the 19th and 20th centuries. As Christmas is coming, I suppose many of us will eat a lot of chocolate. I don't know for you, but I will. And even though there are interesting components in chocolate, such as magnesium, potassium, and a few other valuable alkaloids, this is obviously something that should be consumed moderately, since this is a light stimulant, but more importantly because of the quantity of lipids and carbohydrates that it contains. I hope you enjoyed this little overview, and as I will probably not upload another video before Christmas, I wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and I hope to see you soon for another topic. Thank you, my friends, and bye bye.